Hi guys, so in this video we're going to be looking at 1 year of second shooting and 5 things that I have learned in that last year. So approximately 1 year ago I volunteered in a local Facebook group for my first experience of second shooting a wedding where I'm the second photographer supporting the main photographer. Having spent the last 4 or 5 years filming weddings and doing the odd one for photography myself, but lower end ones, I was keen to try and get into second shooting because thinking about some of the perks of it, given I'm a full-time teacher during the day, I thought it'll save me on editing time, it'll be good experience of being at weddings, and it'll help build a bit of relationships as well. So I thought I'd throw my name into the hat and see if I could pick up any, and through the whole of 2022, I think I ended up doing about 10 to 12 second shoots for weddings, and I'm going to talk you through my five main things that I learned through that year. So, number 5 is that photographers are all different. So, I am part of a group in Aberdeen where there's over 100 wedding photographers and videographers that will sometimes post referrals or look to hire second shooters for weddings they've got coming up. And the first one that took me on was Jade Essen. So I'm going to try and show some photos as I go through this and sort of talk you through some of the challenges and some of the benefits and negatives that I've found. So the first thing I learned was that all photographers are different. And by different, I mean in terms of their communication, their expectation, what they're looking for from their second shooters. Some will be similar, but certainly there are some differences there. I've worked with several who prefer their second shooter to be on prime lenses throughout the day, 2 bodies, quite often a 35-85, 35-50, that sort of combination. I've had some that have preferred using zoom lenses, some that would be happy for their second shooter to use whatever lenses that person is more comfortable with. And I can see pros and cons to each. If you go with what the main photographer uses, then your groom prep is going to maybe mirror what the bride prep is going to look like. And if you're looking for that prime look, you're going to get similar sort of looks to your photos throughout the day, particularly if you stick to those 2 focal lengths. With the zoom idea, or the photographer who says to the second shooter, just use whatever you're most comfortable with, I can totally understand that as well, because if you let someone use whatever focal lengths they're more comfortable with, the idea is that you get better photos from them because they're being allowed to work with whichever setup they're most comfortable with. It's been a great learning experience for me to try out these different styles and incorporate some of that into my own photography as well. Something else that was particularly different and noticeable throughout the different photographers I worked with last year was their expectations on what aspects of the day and they want you to capture. Some would want you to get groom prep, detail shots, venue shots, and candids of guests, while others I've worked with would actually have in their package that they sold group photos of guests when they arrive. And this kind of leads me into the second thing that I think is really important as a second shooter, and that is to communicate effectively beforehand with your photographer that's taking you on. Ask them what it is that they're looking for from you in terms of coverage. Which parts of the day are you going to be responsible for capturing, and what style they want those photos in. One of the big differences was that with group shots of whether it be guests or just the groomsmen in the morning, I've had some photographers who prefer a 35 or 24 millimeter look, that wider look with a bit of context around the background and a bit more space for the people in the photograph to sort of breathe, if you like, while others I've worked with prefer a tighter focal length, a 50 or an 85, where you're getting a bit more of that compressed look to the group shot. And that's something that I think is quite important to communicate beforehand, so that when it comes to those group shots in the day, you get what your main photographer is wanting that is going to match their style. In addition to communicating about what types of shots that you are expected to get, I think communicating your requests or your intentions beforehand is key as well. Everyone that I went into for second shooting last year, I basically asked the photographer, what's your stance or policy on a second photographer using images that they've captured throughout the day as part of their portfolio or advertising their second shooting business. Because my intention last year was to build up a little album of photos that were taken with me as the second shooter, and ideally I would have preferred that to be edited to my style, just so that the album, when I shared that with other photographers when they were looking for a second shooter, had a bit of consistency to it in terms of the edit style. Now, some of the ones that I worked with were quite happy for me to do whatever I wanted with the photos, use them on my website, etc., etc. I think there's a bit of a grey line there in terms of and some of the photographers said this to me, said they're quite happy for me to use the images, but they don't want me to pass them off as if it was my job, the wedding that those photos were taken at, which I think is absolutely fair and probably something I would say as well. You'd want to be transparent and honest that you weren't the main photographer when these images were taken. Going a little bit further than that, I had some photographers who would be happy for me to use images, but only ones that made the final gallery, or to ask me to send them particular favorites that I liked that I'd captured throughout the day, and they would do their best to try and include them in their final gallery so that they could then be used in by me for whatever marketing purposes that or advertising that we agreed beforehand. I also had some who preferred me not to use any of their images, and again, I completely understand that, because they've said that in the past, sometimes that photographer, the second photographer, would try and pass them off as their own, or have them plastered all over their website to make it look like this photographer had shot those weddings as their own. So I can completely understand that. There's also then the other potential negative, where if the second photographer edits them to their style and the couple see them images posted online to a different style and the couple prefer that style, they could then go back to their main photographer and query that, and it puts that first photographer in a bit of an awkward position in that regard. So there's different ways that photographers will like to handle how their second photographer uses or doesn't use images, and I think it's really important to communicate that beforehand and make sure you know where you stand as a second photographer as to whether or not to use images at all that you've caught. The third thing I learned is that second shooting for wedding photos is probably not a full-time job. If you do the maths, you're probably looking at an average of maybe £200 per wedding for second shooting. And given that most weddings will be on either a Friday or Saturday, possibly a Wednesday, that really limits how many days you can actually work as a second shooter. Especially with peak season in Scotland being over the summer. Again, there's going to be less weddings over the winter season, so probably not a full-time job, but can certainly supplement an income. And if you've got a spare weekend in the calendar, certainly a brilliant wee way of topping up a bit of income. Moving on from that, it can potentially limit your own business in a way, because if you take on a lot of second shooting dates, you could then end up missing out on an inquiry that comes. Now, I know some people will see this as they would go back to their main photographer and say, look, I've had an inquiry for this date. Would you mind if I took that one on? And you could try and find an alternative second shooter. But for me, once I've made a commitment to someone, I'll stick to that, and I'll pass up on the future inquiries. I'll just tell them, look, that date's booked, unfortunately. And now I can probably afford to do that because I've still got my full-time job that's given me the income I need. And so sometimes the second shooting is actually better for me because I don't then have the edit time to fit in on top of my full-time job as well. But it's something to just bear in mind that if you are looking to be a full-time photographer, I think you still need to prioritize your own income, your own source, rather than potentially relying on second shooting to make up what you need to get by. And the final thing I learned, although one of the first things I learned throughout my experience second shooting last year, is that it's genuinely a fantastic thing to do in terms of the experience you gain from being at multiple weddings, being able to work with more experienced professionals who you can take bits from. It kind of reminds me a bit being a football fan, and having played football for many years. It kind of makes me think of football coaching and how you might have played for several different managers and you can take little bits from their coaching techniques or their management style that you can then try and incorporate and build your own style from. You get to see where photographers' difficult parts of the day come and how those photographers manage to deal with those tricky parts and those transition phases. It also has given me a greater appreciation of how videographers can blend into the background. There was one or two where the couple had hired a videographer as well, and I'm used to doing video, so I felt like, I'll be a master at staying out of the videographer's way. But you're so focused on trying to do as good a job as you can that quite often it's hard to keep track of where the videographer is. And there was one or two times where I'm pretty sure I would have got in the way of the videographer and had to apologize. But it's given me an appreciation of when I'm videoing weddings, realizing that it's quite difficult to remember where the videographer is as the photographer. So I think that's something I'm gonna appreciate a little bit more for my future wedding videos as well. Another reason I've absolutely loved second shooting for weddings is you've got much less stress. For me, I probably prefer overall videoing weddings to photography. I think just from the editing side, being able to produce a highlights video, and I get a lot of pride in that. The whole wedding party are relying on the photographer to almost manage their day and lead them through their day. Whereas as the second photographer, you have an element of that, but it's not nearly as onerous as what's left to the main photographer. And you can just enjoy the day. You get to laugh with everyone. You know that the photographer, it's on them to get the really important shots, and it's a bonus if you can get a good shot to back up what they get, but they're going to get their priority shot. So you don't have the same level of stress as the main photographer does. And for me, it's great because I don't have that editing time on top of the work as well. So having a full-time job at the side, it's just giving up a day. And you know, it's weddings are great to be at. So I am looking to keep the second shooting going this year. I've got a few booked in, a lot of my own weddings as well, and really excited to see what 2023 brings.